I'm Danielle, 28 female. I live in a small but cozy apartment downtown, filled with books and carefully cataloged photos, a quiet life I built for myself after my father, Michael, passed away 2 years ago. I work as an archivist for the City Museum, a job I love because it's all about preserving history and honoring the stories that objects tell. Little did I know, I was about to become the sole protector of my own family's most precious history, fighting a battle I never saw coming. This is the story of how my mother's cold-hearted betrayal almost destroyed me, and how a forgotten detail my father left behind became my key to justice. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My dad, Michael, wasn't a man of grand gestures or loud declarations of love. His affection was quiet, tangible, and built with his own two hands. He was a master craftsman, a woodworker who could turn a block of oak into a piece of art. His workshop, a converted two-car garage at the back of my childhood home, was his sanctuary. It smelled perpetually of sawdust, varnish, and old coffee. For me, it was the safest place in the world. It was where he taught me how to sand a piece of wood until it was as smooth as glass, how to identify different grains, and how the soul of the tree lived on in the things you created from it. Every piece of furniture in his study, every hand-carved box, and every intricate clock held a piece of him. These weren't just things, they were his life's work, his legacy. When he got sick, he knew his time was limited. We spent many afternoons in his study, surrounded by his creations. "Danielle," he said one day, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it, "all of this, it's for you. Your mother, she doesn't see it the way we do." He was right. My mother, Brenda, was an interior designer whose entire philosophy revolved around minimalism, clean lines, and a distinct lack of anything she deemed clutter. To her, Dad's workshop was an eyesore, and his collection of handcrafted furniture was heavy and dated. She appreciated a factory-made Italian leather sofa, but couldn't see the value in a rocking chair my father had spent 100 hours carving from cherry wood. "He sees junk, Danny, I see memories," he'd whispered, pressing a small, hand-carved key into my palm. It was the key to his largest tool chest. "When I'm gone, this is all yours. The will is clear. Mr. Vance has a copy of everything." I promised him I would cherish it all, that I'd find a home for every single piece, even if it took me years to find a place big enough. It was the last real promise I made to him. After he passed, the house felt cavernous and cold. My mother immediately began what she called updating. She painted over the warm, earthy tones Dad had loved with sterile shades of gray and white. She replaced his comfortable, worn-out armchair with a rigid, modern piece of furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum lobby. I understood her need to move forward, to make the space her own, but it felt like she was systematically erasing him. The workshop and his study, however, were supposed to be off-limits. They were my inheritance, clearly stipulated in the will. I was still living in a small apartment and didn't have the space to move everything immediately. My mother had agreed, albeit reluctantly, to let me store everything there for up to a year while I saved up for a bigger place. "Fine, Danielle," she'd said with a sigh, "but don't take forever. I can't have that dusty old stuff taking up valuable real estate indefinitely." Real estate, that's all it was to her. Not Dad's soul, not my inheritance. Real estate. Over the next 6 months, I visited every weekend. I'd spend hours in the workshop, cleaning his tools, organizing his blueprints, and just breathing in the familiar scent. I started cataloging everything myself, taking pictures and writing down the stories he'd told me about each piece. There was the first bookshelf he ever built, the one with the slightly crooked shelf he'd left as a reminder that nothing is perfect. There was the intricate jewelry box he made for my 16th birthday, with my initials carved into the lid. And there were his tools, a collection spanning 40 years. Some were worn smooth from decades of use, their wooden handles molded to the shape of his hand. They felt like an extension of him. My best friend, Chloe, understood. She'd come over sometimes and help me sort through boxes of old photographs and letters I found in his desk. "Your dad was such an amazing man," she'd say, looking at a picture of him holding a younger me on his shoulders. He put so much love into everything he touched. She was a pastry chef, an artist in her own right, and she appreciated the dedication and passion went into my father's work. She saw the value my mother refused to acknowledge. The last time I saw everything intact was on a Saturday afternoon. I had spent the day polishing a beautiful grandfather clock he'd finished just before he got too sick to work. I ran my hand over the smooth, gleaming wood, my reflection staring back at me. I felt my dad there with me, a peaceful, comforting presence. Before I left, I stood in the doorway of the workshop, taking it all in. The stacks of rare lumber, the neatly organized tools on the pegboard wall, the half-finished project on his workbench. It was a perfect, preserved pocket of his existence. I told my mom I'd be back the following weekend to start moving some of the smaller boxes to a storage unit I'd finally rented. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on a design magazine. "Whatever, Danielle, just get it done." That was the last thing she ever said to me about my father's belongings. I had no idea that when I returned, my entire world would be gone. The following Sunday, I drove to my mother's house with a sense of purpose. I'd rented a small, climate-controlled storage unit, the first step in fulfilling my promise to my dad. I had empty boxes in my trunk and a list of the smaller items I could manage on my own. His collection of vintage woodworking magazines, the small hand tools, the boxes of family photos stored in his desk. I pulled into the familiar gravel driveway, humming along to the radio, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. The sun was bright, and it felt like a hopeful day, a day for new beginnings. As I got out of the car, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Usually on a Sunday, I could hear the faint buzz of a neighbor mowing their lawn or kids playing down the street. But today, the silence felt different. It was heavy, empty. I walked up to the side of the house, heading for the back gate that led to the workshop. That's when I saw it. The large, double doors of the workshop were wide open. A cold dread washed over me. Dad was meticulous about security. He never, ever left those doors unlocked, let alone wide open. My heart started to pound in my chest. I thought maybe there had been a break-in. I ran toward the doors, calling out, "Mom, is everything okay?" I peered inside, and my breath caught in my throat. The workshop was empty. I don't mean tidy or organized. I mean stripped bare. The pegboard walls were naked, with nothing but the faint outlines of where his tools had once hung. The heavy workbench was gone. The stacks of lumber had vanished. The air no longer smelled of sawdust and varnish. It smelled of bleach and cleaning fluid. It was sterile, anonymous, and utterly devastating. It was like my father had never existed. I stumbled back, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This had to be a mistake, a nightmare. I ran to the back door of the house and fumbled with my key, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the door open. "Mom!" I screamed, my voice cracking with panic. She appeared at the top of the basement stairs, holding a laundry basket. She was wearing pristine white pants and a cashmere sweater, looking completely unbothered. She didn't even seem surprised to see me in such a state. "Danielle, what on earth is all the shouting about? You'll give the neighbors a heart attack." "The workshop," I gasped, struggling for air. "It's empty. Everything's gone. Were we robbed? Did you call the police?" My mother set down her laundry basket and sighed, a long, exasperated sound that I knew all too well. It was the sound she made when I was being overly emotional or dramatic. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Danielle. Nobody robbed us. I cleaned it out." She said it so casually, as if she were talking about throwing out old newspapers. I stared at her, my mind a swirling vortex of confusion and horror. "Cleaned it out? What do you mean you cleaned it out? Mom, that was Dad's, that was my stuff. The will." "The will?" she interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be so dramatic. It was a garage full of junk. It was cluttering up the property, and frankly, it was bringing down the value of the house. I have to think about the future, you know." "The future?" I whispered, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. "What about Dad's past? What about my future with his things? The furniture, his tools, the rocking chair he made for me when I was born. Mom, where is it?" I prayed she had just moved it, maybe put it in a large storage facility somewhere. A cruel, thoughtless act, but reversible. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. I got rid of it. I hired one of those junk removal services on Friday. They cleared it all out. The furniture from the study, too. It's gone, Danielle. And honestly, the house feels so much lighter now. You should see how much bigger the study looks. Gone, the word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room. It wasn't just gone. It was razed. 40 years of my father's life, his passion, his soul, tossed into the back of a junk truck because it cluttered her house. The bookshelf with the crooked shelf, the jewelry box, the tools that fit his hands perfectly. All of it just gone. I couldn't breathe. The room started to spin, the pristine white walls closing in on me. I looked at my mother's face, searching for any sign of remorse, of understanding, of anything other than cold, detached self-satisfaction. There was nothing. She was smiling faintly, pleased with her work. She had finally won her long-standing battle against my father's mess. I felt a roar building in my chest, a primal scream of grief and rage, but no sound came out. My legs felt weak, my vision started to blur at the edges. I had to get out of there. I couldn't be in the same room as her, this stranger who looked like my mother but had a void where her heart should be. I turned and fled, stumbling out the back door, away from the sterile house and the woman who had just bulldozed my history. The silence of the day was no longer peaceful. It was a roaring testament to everything I had just lost. I stumbled out of the house and into the blinding sunlight, my lungs burning, desperate for air that wasn't tainted with the smell of my mother's betrayal. My mind was a chaotic storm of images. My father's hands guiding mine over a piece of wood, the smile on his face as he showed me a finished project, the quiet pride in his eyes. Now, all I could see was the gaping emptiness of the workshop, a wound carved into the heart of my childhood home. Each memory was now a ghost, haunting a space that had been wiped clean. I made it halfway down the driveway before my legs gave out. The world tilted sideways, the blue sky and green lawn blurring into a nauseating swirl of color. My knees hit the sharp gravel with a force that barely registered over the agony in my chest. I collapsed forward, catching myself with my hands, the small stones digging into my palms. I stayed there, on all fours, gasping for breath like a drowning person. The grief was a physical force, a crushing weight that pinned me to the ground. It was a pain more profound and visceral than even the day my father had died. When he died, I still had his legacy. Now, I had nothing. Sobs racked my body, ugly, guttural sounds of pure despair. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the dust and dirt on the driveway. I was completely and utterly broken. My mother had not just thrown away objects. She had thrown away my connection to my father. She had taken the last tangible pieces of him I had left and discarded them like trash. Why? Because they cluttered her perfect, minimalist life? Because they didn't fit her aesthetic? The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a deliberate act of erasure. A final, victorious blow in her lifelong war against a part of my father she never understood or respected. I don't know how long I knelt there, lost in a sea of pain. It could have been minutes or an hour. The world had shrunk to the patch of gravel beneath my hands and the overwhelming sense of loss. Eventually, I heard the crunch of tires as a car pulled into the driveway next door. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind, elderly woman who had known me since I was a child, got out of her car. Her face, usually wreathed in smiles, was etched with concern. "Danielle, honey, are you all right?" she asked, rushing over to me. I couldn't speak. I could only shake my head, the sobs starting anew. She knelt beside me, her warm hand on my back. "What is it, dear? What's happened?" Through my broken breaths, I managed to choke out the words. She threw it all away, my dad's workshop, the furniture, it's all gone. Mrs. Gable's eyes widened in disbelief, and then her expression hardened. She looked toward the house where my mother was probably sipping tea, admiring her newly decluttered space. "Brenda did this?" she asked, her voice low and angry. I just nodded. "Oh, that woman," she muttered. "I saw the truck on Friday. One of those big 1-800 junk things. They were here for hours. I thought you were finally moving everything. I had no idea." She trailed off, shaking her head in disgust. Her confirmation was like another punch to the gut. It was real. It wasn't a misunderstanding. A junk truck. My father's life's work, his passion, his legacy had been hauled away as garbage. I imagined his handcrafted rocking chair being thrown into a compactor, his delicate carvings splintering, his tools rusting in a landfill. The image was so violent, so unbearable, that I felt a fresh wave of nausea. Mrs. Gable helped me to my feet, my legs still trembling. "Come on, dear, you can't stay here, come to my house, I'll make you some tea." I let her guide me, leaning on her frail but steady frame. I felt like a child again, completely helpless and lost, sitting in her cozy, cluttered kitchen, filled with family photos, mismatched mugs, and the calm, fording smell of cinnamon was a stark contrast to my mother's cold, sterile home. Here, memories were cherished, not discarded. She didn't press me for details. She just sat with me, letting me cry until I had no tears left, leaving me with only a hollow, aching emptiness. When my sobs finally subsided, I just stared blankly at the teacup in my hands. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Chloe. I had forgotten we were supposed to meet for coffee. I ignored it. I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't form the words. After a while, a new feeling began to seep into the emptiness, a cold, hard rage. It started as a tiny spark in the pit of my stomach and slowly grew, burning away the fog of grief. My mother had known exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a thoughtless act, it was a calculated one. She had waited until I had a plan to move the items, waited until I was on the cusp of securing them, and then she had ripped them away. She had done it to hurt me, to sever my bond with my father, to finally have the perfectly curated, Michael-free home she'd always wanted. She had anticipated my devastation. What she hadn't anticipated was what would come after. As I sat there tracing the rim of the teacup, a single, clear thought cut through the anger. Dad, he was so meticulous, so organized. He planned for everything. He knew my mother. He knew what she was capable of. He had warned me. "She doesn't see it the way we do," he'd said. He wouldn't have left his life's work unprotected. He wouldn't have left me unprotected. My promise to him was to cherish his things. But maybe his final promise to me was to ensure I always could. The gears in my mind started to turn, slowly at first, and then with increasing speed. There was something I was forgetting, a detail lost in the shock and grief. I stayed at Mrs. Gable's for another hour, the initial storm of my grief slowly receding, leaving behind a desolate landscape and a single, burning ember of rage. I thanked her for her kindness, my voice still hoarse, and finally made my way back to my own car. I couldn't bear to look at my mother's house. As I drove away, I didn't go home. I went to the one place I thought might bring me some semblance of peace, the small park where my dad used to take me to fly kites. I sat on a bench overlooking the duck pond, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For the first time since I discovered the empty workshop, I allowed myself to think. I pushed past the pain and focused on my father. Michael was a craftsman, and a craftsman's mind is all about details, precision, and planning. He never started a project without a detailed blueprint. He measured twice, cut once. He inventoried his lumber, categorized his screws, and kept meticulous records of every piece he ever sold or gifted. He was a man who believed in order and preparation. He had known my mother's nature better than anyone. He had lived with her casual disregard for his passion for over 30 years. Would he really have left his entire legacy vulnerable, protected only by a clause in a will that he knew she would resent? The thought kept circling in my mind. He wouldn't have. It simply wasn't in his character. He would have built in a failsafe. My mind flashed back to that last conversation in his study, the smell of old books and lemon polish, the weight of the small, hand-carved key in my palm. His words echoed in my ears. "When I'm gone, this is all yours. The will is clear. Mr. Vance has a copy of everything." A copy of everything. At the time, I assumed he just meant a copy of the will. But what if he meant more? What if everything meant everything? The word hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. Mr. Arthur Vance, my father's estate lawyer. A stoic, old-school gentleman who had handled my family's affairs for decades. He was sharp, thorough, and had a deep respect for my father. My heart began to beat faster, a flutter of hope in the vast emptiness of my grief. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I searched for Mr. Vance's contact information. It was late on a Sunday, but I had his personal number from the paperwork after my father's passing. I hesitated for only a moment before pressing the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. "Arthur Vance speaking." "Mr. Vance, it's Danielle, Michael's daughter," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry to bother you on a Sunday." "Danielle, not a bother at all. Is everything all right? You sound distressed." The dam broke. The whole story came pouring out of me, the empty workshop, the missing furniture, my mother's casual confession, the junk truck. I recounted every horrific detail, my voice cracking with renewed grief and rising anger. Mr. Vance listened patiently, not interrupting once. The silence on his end of the line was not empty, it was attentive, absorbing every word. When I finished, there was a long pause. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to offer his condolences and tell me there was nothing he could do, that my mother was within her rights as the owner of the house and the items were just gone. But then he spoke, and his voice was cold steel. "Danielle, your father anticipated this," he said calmly. "Perhaps not this exact scenario, but he was acutely aware of your mother's lack of sentiment. He took precautions." I held my breath. "Precautions? What kind of precautions?" "Your father didn't just leave you his belongings in the will," Mr. Vance explained. "About a year before he passed, he came to my office with a very large, very heavy binder. Inside that binder is a complete itemized inventory of every single significant item in his workshop and study. And when I say itemized, I mean itemized. Each piece of furniture, each power tool, every hand-carved box, it's all in there. Each entry includes photographs from multiple angles, a detailed description, the type of wood or materials used, the year it was made, and its estimated value." I sank back against the park bench, my head spinning. An inventory. A detailed, itemized inventory. But Mr. Vance wasn't finished. He didn't just estimate the value himself, Danielle. He had every single item professionally appraised by a certified antique and fine crafts appraiser. Furthermore, he took out a specific insurance policy on the entire collection, listing you as the sole beneficiary in the event of theft or destruction. The policy is tied to the appraised value in the inventory. Your mother was a signatory on the will, but she was not made privy to the existence of the inventory or the insurance policy. Your father wanted it kept separate as a final gift to you, a form of protection. He called it his blueprint for your future. I was speechless. A blueprint for my future. It was the final project he had ever worked on, not with wood and nails, but with paper and foresight. He had known. He had looked into the future and seen this exact moment of betrayal and had forged a shield to protect me from it. The love in that action, the sheer depth of his care for me, was overwhelming. It was a voice from beyond the grave, telling me he was still with me, still looking out for me. "Mr. Vance," I finally managed to say, the word catching in my throat. "What does this mean? What can we do?" "It means, Danielle," he said, and I could almost hear a grim smile in his voice, "that your mother did not throw out a garage full of clutter. She illegally disposed of a fully appraised and insured collection of assets that legally belonged to you. She has committed an act of conversion of property, and we are going to hold her financially accountable for every single last nail." The ember of rage within me roared into a blazing inferno. This was no longer just about grief. This was about justice. My father's final gift wasn't just a list, it was a weapon, and I was going to learn how to use it. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Vance's office feeling like a different person. The devastating grief was still there, a heavy cloak I knew I would carry for a long time, but it was now overlaid with a cold, clear sense of purpose. I was no longer Danielle, the heartbroken daughter. I was Danielle, the curator of my father's legacy, armed with his final, brilliant act of foresight. Mr. Vance's office was exactly as I remembered it. Walls lined with leather-bound books, a faint smell of paper and pipe tobacco, and a grandfather clock, not one of my father's, but an old, stately one, ticking rhythmically in the corner. He greeted me not with pity, but with a firm handshake and a determined look in his eye. "Danielle, I'm glad you're here. We have work to do." He led me to a large mahogany conference table. In the center of it was a thick, navy blue binder. It was at least 4 inches thick, with a simple label on the spine, MH Personal Property Inventory. My father's initials. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was more thorough than I could have ever imagined. The first page was a signed and notarized statement from my father, declaring everything within the binder as his personal collection, to be passed in its entirety to me, his daughter. Following that, page after page was dedicated to his life's work. Each item was meticulously documented. There was a photo of the cherry wood rocking chair, its smooth curves and perfect finish captured in high-resolution detail. Beside it was the appraiser's notes. American craftsman style, hand-carved from a single piece of reclaimed cherry, estimated 120 hours of labor. The appraised value was listed at the bottom, $4,500. I flipped the page, the grandfather clock I had polished just before it was all taken away. Appraised value, $9,000. His primary workbench, built by his own father and passed down to him, was listed not just for its material value, but its historical and sentimental value. A price set at $7,000. Page after page, it went on. His collection of Japanese hand saws, a complete set of antique chisels, the first bookshelf with the crooked shelf. Even the smaller, sentimental items were there. The small jewelry box he made me, appraised as a piece of intricate marquetry art for $1,200. The inventory was a testament to his love and his meticulous nature. But it was also a weapon, perfectly crafted. The appraiser my father had hired was renowned in the field, his valuations beyond reproach. The insurance policy was with one of the largest firms in the country, ironclad and specific. Mr. Vance laid out our plan with the precision of a seasoned general. "First," he said, "we calculate the total value. We need an exact number." For the next 3 hours, we did just that. With a calculator and a legal pad, I went through the binder item by item, calling out the values while he tallied them up. The numbers climbed higher and higher, far beyond what I could have ever guessed. The furniture, the tools, the rare lumber, the antique pieces he'd restored, it all added up. By the time we reached the last page, my hands were shaking. Mr. Vance did the final calculation, his pen scratching on the notepad. He circled the final number and pushed the pad across the table to me. I looked down, and the breath left my lungs in a rush. Total appraised value, $387,550. Nearly $400,000. That was the clutter my mother had so casually disposed of. That was the junk she'd paid someone a few $100s to haul to the dump. The sheer scale of her destructive act was staggering. It wasn't just sentiment she had destroyed, it was a significant financial asset. My entire future, which my father had so carefully built for me, she had thrown in the trash. "This is the amount we will be demanding," Mr. Vance said, his voice firm. "We will send your mother a formal demand letter. It will state that she has committed tortious conversion of your personal property. It will detail the total appraised value and demand full restitution within 30 days. If she fails to comply, we will file a lawsuit." "Will she have to pay it?" I asked, the number still seeming unreal. "She will," he affirmed. "The evidence is irrefutable. We have the will, which grants you the items. We have this notarized inventory with professional, independent appraisals. We have the insurance policy, which further establishes the recognized value. And you have a witness, your neighbor, who saw the junk removal truck. Her defense, that it was clutter. That will not hold up in any court of law. She willfully destroyed property that she knew was not hers. And she will be held liable for its full replacement value." He explained the next steps. He would draft the demand letter and have it sent via certified mail, so there would be a legal record of her receiving it. We would give her the 30 days to respond. He warned me that she would likely react with anger and denial. He advised me not to engage with her directly, to let him handle all communication. As I left his office, the heavy binder tucked securely under my arm, I felt a sense of grim resolve. This wasn't about the money. I would have given 10 times that amount to have my father's workshop back, to be able to run my hand over his workbench one more time. But that was impossible. My mother had made sure of that. The money was the only language she understood. Value to her was measured in dollars and cents, not in love, history, or memory. So I would speak to her in that language. I would present her with a bill for the legacy she had tried to erase. My father had given me the blueprint and the tools. Now, it was up to me to build the case and see justice done. The memory of my collapse on the gravel driveway was still fresh, but now it felt different. It was no longer the site of my defeat, but the ground from which I would rise. The 30 days that followed the sending of the demand letter were some of the longest of my life. As Mr. Vance predicted, the initial fallout was explosive. My mother received the certified letter on a Tuesday afternoon. My phone started ringing less than 10 minutes later. I saw her name flash on the screen and my heart hammered against my ribs, but I followed Mr. Vance's advice. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. It wasn't the voice of my mother, it was the screech of a cornered animal. It was a tirade of disbelief, rage, and accusations. I was an ungrateful daughter. I was delusional. How dare I extort my own mother? The items were worthless junk, and the figure of $387,550 was a laughable, insane fabrication. She demanded I call her back immediately and stop this ridiculous nonsense. She called me a dozen more times that day. I never answered. Chloe, my rock through all of this, came over that night and made me turn my phone off completely. We ordered pizza and watched a stupid movie, and for a few hours, I almost forgot about the war I had just declared. The next day, the attack changed tactics. She started texting me, a barrage of messages that swung wildly between fury and feigned concern. Danielle, you're clearly not well. Grief is making you do crazy things. Your father would be ashamed of you, trying to ruin me like this. This lawyer of yours is a parasite, filling your head with lies. Then came the attempts at manipulation, the emotional blackmail she was so good at. I'm your mother. How can you do this to your own family? After all I've done for you. Each message was a small pinprick, trying to find a weak spot in my resolve. But my resolve wasn't weak. It was forged in the fire of her betrayal and reinforced by the meticulous love my father had poured into that binder. I sent screenshots of all the messages to Mr. Vance, who told me to continue my silence. Let her show her true colors, he advised. It's all evidence. A week later, Mr. Vance received a letter from a lawyer my mother had hired. The letter was dismissive, echoing her claims. It stated that the items were of negligible value, that as the owner of the property, she had the right to dispose of abandoned items, and that my claim was frivolous and amounted to harassment. They offered a goodwill gesture of $5,000 to settle the matter and repair the family bond. Mr. Vance and I had a brief phone call. $5,000, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. That wouldn't even cover the cost of the grandfather clock. It's an insulting offer, Mr. Vance agreed. And a sign of desperation. They know they don't have a case, so they're trying to see if you'll scare easily. We will not be scared. He sent back a firm rejection of their offer, along with a copy of the first 10 pages of the appraised inventory, including the appraiser's credentials and the notarized statement from my father. He politely informed them that if we did not receive a substantive settlement offer within the next 2 weeks, we would be filing the lawsuit on the 30th day, as promised. That's when the real panic must have set in for my mother. The next communication was from her, a long, rambling email. For the first time, there was a crack in her armor of self-righteousness. She admitted she might have been a bit hasty. She claimed she didn't realize the items meant so much to me. She was just trying to move on from the grief of losing my father and create a fresh start. It was a masterclass in self-pity and blame-shifting, with not a single genuine word of apology for the pain she had caused me. The email ended with an offer to pay for some new furniture for my apartment. I didn't even bother forwarding that one to Mr. Vance. It was clear she still didn't get it. She thought this was about furniture. She could not comprehend that she had thrown away a lifetime of memories, a man's soul captured in wood and steel. She couldn't understand that no amount of new furniture could ever replace the rocking chair my father had built. The 30-day deadline arrived on a Thursday. We had received no further communication from her lawyer. True to his word, Mr. Vance filed the lawsuit. The official summons was delivered to my mother's pristine, minimalist home by a process server the following afternoon. This time, when she called me, her voice wasn't angry. It was shaking. "Danielle," she said, the word barely a whisper. I had decided to answer this one time. I wanted to hear it from her. "They served me with papers, a lawsuit, for the full amount. This can't be real." "It's very real, Mom," I said, my voice as calm and steady as I could make it. "You left me no other choice." "But I don't have that kind of money," she cried, the panic rising in her voice. "Your father, he handled the finances. The house is all I have. You'll make me homeless." And there it was, the final, desperate gambit, the victim card, but I knew better. I knew my father was a careful planner. I knew they had investments, retirement accounts. And I knew the house, which was fully paid off, was worth over $1 million in the current market. She wasn't facing homelessness. She was facing the consequences of her actions. She was facing a bill for the legacy she destroyed. "You should have thought of that," I said, my voice devoid of the emotion she was trying so desperately to provoke, "before you threw my father's entire life into a dumpster because it didn't match your decor. You made a choice, Mom. Now you have to pay the price. Goodbye." I hung up the phone before she could respond. I felt a profound, aching sadness, but no regret. She had created this situation. She had valued her aesthetics over her daughter's heart and her late husband's memory. She had signed the papers, served the notice, and thrown away the first piece of my soul. The unpayable debt wasn't the money, it was the love and trust she had shattered. The money was just the ear. THLY consequence, the only one she could ever be made to understand. The confrontation was over. Now, all that was left was the aftermath. The legal battle was, in the end, remarkably short. Once my mother's lawyer saw the full extent of our evidence, the complete 200-page binder of appraisals, the insurance policy, the notarized statements, Mrs. Gable's witness testimony, they knew they didn't stand a chance in court. Their client's only defense was her own ignorance and arrogance, which are not compelling legal arguments. They strongly advised her to settle. The negotiation was tense. My mother, through her lawyer, tried everything to reduce the amount. She claimed emotional distress. She claimed she was a grieving widow who wasn't thinking clearly. She claimed I was exploiting her. Mr. Vance was a brick wall. He calmly refuted every claim, presenting the facts over and over again. The value was the value. The loss was the loss. After 2 weeks of back and forth, they capitulated. The settlement was for $350,000. It was slightly less than the full appraised value. A compromise Mr. Vance said would save us the time and emotional toll of a court trial, and I agreed. To fund the settlement, my mother had to take out a significant home equity loan against the house she had been so desperate to perfect. The irony was not lost on me. Her desire to increase the home's aesthetic value had resulted in a massive lien against its monetary value. She had, in a very real sense, been forced to pay for what she had destroyed. The day the check from the settlement cleared in my bank account, I didn't feel the triumph I had expected. I just felt a quiet, somber sense of closure. The money was a tool, nothing more. It was the means to an end, the end being the fulfillment of the promise I had made to my father. I didn't buy a fancy car or a luxury apartment. I used a significant portion of the money to buy a small house on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't large or extravagant, but it had one feature that was non-negotiable: a detached, spacious garage. For the next year, I poured my heart, my soul, and the settlement money into a new project. I began the painstaking process of rebuilding my father's legacy, not with his original pieces, but with his memory as my guide. I started by hunting for his tools. Using the detailed inventory as my shopping list, I scoured antique markets, online auctions, and specialty tool shops. I found the same model of 1970s table saw he had cherished. I bought a set of Japanese hand saws identical to his. Each tool I acquired felt like recovering a lost piece of him. I arranged them on a new pegboard wall in my garage, following the faint outlines I remembered from his workshop. Then I started woodworking myself. My father had taught me the basics as a child, but now I took classes, studied his old blueprints that I had thankfully stored in my apartment, and dedicated my weekends to the craft. My first project was a simple bookshelf. I even made one shelf slightly crooked, just like his. As I worked, the smell of sawdust and varnish filled my new workshop. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like he was there with me, his quiet, steady presence guiding my hands. I have not spoken to my mother since the day I hung up on her. I hear through the grapevine that she is bitter and resentful, casting herself as the victim in a story of a greedy, heartless daughter. She lives in her perfect, sterile house, now burdened by the debt of her own cruelty. I harbor no hatred for her anymore, only a distant, sad pity. She is the one who has to live in the silence she created, surrounded by beautiful, empty things that hold no stories. My house, on the other hand, is slowly filling with memories. My workshop is my sanctuary. I am not the master craftsman my father was, but I find joy in the process, in creating something real and tangible. I am the curator of his memory, and my work is my tribute. I started a small, online blog where I share pictures of his original pieces from the inventory binder and document my own journey in recreating them. It has found a small but dedicated audience of fellow woodworkers and people who appreciate the stories behind handcrafted items. The money didn't bring my father's things back, but it gave me the space and the means to honor him in the way I knew how. He left me a blueprint for my future, and it wasn't about the money. It was about resilience. It was about understanding that even when someone tries to erase your history, you have the power to rebuild it. My father's real legacy wasn't in the objects themselves, but in the love and skill he poured into them. And that is something no one can ever take away.